Hello everyone! My name is Aaron Christensen, and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. On May 9th, 2024, cinephiles everywhere bid adieu to one of the true giants of modern-day Hollywood, Roger Corman. The producer of nearly 500 films and director of 50, Corman also served as mentor for countless writers, directors, actors, and technicians who proceeded to shape the face of Hollywood in the 1960s, 70s, and beyond. We at Horror 101 would like to take this opportunity to honor Uncle Roger by highlighting two of the more unusual efforts in his now classic series of Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, both of which premiered in 1964 and both starring the inimitable Crown Prince of Horror, Vincent Price, The Masque of the Red Death and The Tomb of Ligeia. While Masque revels in extraordinary colors and production design, Ligeia enjoys on-location exteriors shot in the English countryside, with both films borrowing sets from far more expensive British studio productions. Corman was also blessed with fantastic collaborators such as screenwriters Charles Beaumont and Robert Towne, and cinematographers Nicholas Roeg and Arthur Grant. For his part, Price rises to the occasions admirably, offering a subdued and sinister turn for the former, and a restrained variation on his usual madman clinging to sanity for the latter. The screen icon is ably matched by his co-stars, which include Jane Asher, Patrick McGee, Hazel Court, Elizabeth Shepard, John Westbrook, and Oliver Johnston. Tonight, we pay tribute to the closing chapters of the A.I. Poe cycle, classics that have endured for 6 decades and will likely endure another 6 or more. 60 years of A.I. Poe. I've got an awesome panel to chat about these two incredible films, and let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Jessica Dwyer.
Hello, everybody.
Christiana Benedict.
Hello.
Larry Sternshine.
Happy to be here.
And Dan Kiggins.
Thanks for having me.
And we are here to chat about The Masque of the Red Death and The Tomb of Ligeia, both from 1964, both celebrating their 60th anniversary, both directed by Roger Corman and both starring Vincent Price. Thank you all for coming on the show, and welcome. Let's get started. Jessica, I'm going to kick things off with you. Welcome, and thank you for coming on the show. This is your debut appearance, and you are from the old home state of Mr. Vincent Price, are you not?
I am indeed. I grew up in Southeast Missouri, which was about an hour away from St. Louis, where the man himself was born and raised, and his family had an ice cream and candy company there. But for years, I, like many other people, probably thought, I always thought he was from Europe. But when I found out very young that he was from my home state, I was in shock and very excited and proud to know that he was from my part of the world.
And Christiana, you also share a state with Mr. Price as well.
Yes, I do. And I have taken more than one person to see Vincent's star on the St. Louis Walk of Fame on Delmar Avenue, which is, by the way, across the street from Blueberry Hill, where Chuck Berry got in real big trouble for putting cameras in the ladies' room.
Whoops. You know, there's always a dark side to things. Let's go ahead and just get started with the idea of, Roger Corman and his A.I. Poe series. It's called A.I. Poe because they were distributed rather by American International Pictures. But they were all classic adaptations of classic Poe short stories, beginning with The Fall of the House of Usher in 1960. And then this is coming toward the end of the Poe cycle. And I think both of these films kind of represent a departure in one way or another from the Poe cycle as we had seen it before. Dan, what was your first exposure to these A.I. Poe pictures And do you remember which one you saw first?
It was either Masque of the Red Death or it was Pit and the Pendulum, and they were staples on Svengoolie. Like this was what we'd get every once in a while, and I remember Vincent hamming it up back in the day. I didn't realize until I was assigned this by you that I'd never seen Tomb of Ligeia. My whole collection. I went to go pull it off the shelf, and all of a sudden, I'd realized I didn't own it, and I was devastated. You know what I mean? But also kind of pleasantly surprised that, like, I thought that I'd seen it all, done it all, and there was one more nugget of Corman love and with Vincent Price. So it was almost like a present to me after his passing type of thing. I get to see something new again. There's a chance I might have seen it, but I don't remember. So it's new to me. So, but Masque of the Red Death I'd seen probably 50 times. So I was more than happy to do this. But yeah, my first one, it had to be either Pit and the Pendulum or Masque of the Red Death.
Larry, how about you? What was your introduction to Vincent Price and Roger Corman?
Yeah, I'm kind of getting to a lot of older horror films a lot later in life. But this particular one, Masque of the Red Death, I saw at the Music Box. I think it was the Massacre at the time. It was before Of Horrors. And Joe Dante was there, and he said, "Hey, I want you guys to play Masque of the Red Death." And I was there in the theater, and I fell in love with this thing. I really felt like I was back in the 60s because you're in the Music Box. It's got that great sound where everything is just sort of like echoes slightly, and with the Technicolor cinematography and everything, I was just like mesmerized by this whole thing. And one of the reasons why I just was like, oh, I'll do this episode, because it's always been in the back of my mind. I always think about the cinematography and the experience that I had. So that was the first time that I saw them. And then, so Tomb of Ligeia, it's kind of a funny story real quick, is basically I hadn't seen it, and I was like, oh, I should probably watch before this. And I was like, oh, I could buy the physical media Blu-ray, but I said, you know what, I'll just see if it's streaming, make it easy. It's on one streaming service. I signed up for the free trial for the streaming service so I can watch it, but I'm like, it's late, I'll watch it tomorrow. The next day is June 1st. It disappears out nowhere. So then I find out, it's on Vudu. So I rent it for $3.99 HDX. So I was like, okay, well, it looked nice. You know what? 4:3 aspect ratio.
Oh, no.
No. Full screen. I watched it Panascan. So the lesson here, folks, is when you have the chance to buy physical media, buy physical media.
Yep.
So I have to rewatch it now in the full widescreen aspect ratio. That was a really good movie, too. And we'll talk about it more, but they're so different from each other, too.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So it was surprising when you said it was the same year, because I didn't even think about it, because it doesn't feel like the same.
Well, and we'll talk more about this for sure, but I mean, this was getting toward the end of the cycle, and I think Corman was very visibly trying to do something different at this point. The first 3 or 4, they do feel very similar in tone and style, and it really feels like he's trying to explore something different. Christian, do you remember when you saw Masque of the Red Death for the first time, since it seems like that was the popular theme?
I knew this question was coming, and I've spent like the last week trying to remember when I first saw either of these films. Maybe when I was a teenager, maybe when I was running a video store. I don't actually remember. I know that I saw at least one of the Poe films on, like, whatever the late horror movie was on Saturday night when I was a kid, but I don't remember which one it was. Couldn't tell you. Well,
I remember when we were talking about putting the movies together for Horror 101 for the book. And I actually was talking with you because I said, like Pit and the Pendulum was such a key film for me, because it was my first AI Poe, and it may have been my introduction to Vincent Price. And you're kind of like, yeah, I don't know if you can include that one as like a Horror 101. I would probably lean toward Masque of the Red Death. And I went, okay, let me go check this out. And I went, you know what? You're right. House of Usher and Masque of the Red Death, those feel kind of like good representatives of Corman and the AI Poe series.
I mean, I recommend the Masque of the Red Death to a lot of my, snootier cinephile friends, because it looks like a Bergman film.
Yeah, it's Corman goes art house for sure.
Yeah,
I think they delayed Masque of the Red Death. He was going to do that right after Fall of the House of Usher, but he thought the hot tub thing was too close to a Bergman film, so
Mm.
or it was Fellini. It was a Fellini film.
No,
So
it's the seventh seal that he talks
Yeah,
about specifically.
yeah.
You know, and in that I mean, you know, death is personified in both movies. So there you
There are
go.
similarities. Yeah.
I mean, that's disingenuous on Corman's part because Corman is a thieving magpie. I mean, you look at the first of the Poe movies, House of Usher. I mean, the whole premature burial scene in that film is ripped off whole and breathing from Isle of the Dead. Even at the very end, the tomb of Ligeia is totally warmed over Rebecca.
Well, exactly. And if it works, it works.
Yeah.
Jessica, do you remember when you saw Mask of the Red Death for the first time?
I think I saw Masque of the Red Death, and this is because I had a sister who was 11 years older than me. I probably saw it when I was 10, and I remember being enthralled by that movie and the color, and Vincent Price just immediately grabbed my heart and never let go. I was probably like 10 years old. It was most likely either on a bootleg VHS or because we did that. Or it was on Irv Kopey's PBS late night creature feature.
Mm.
He would do those as well. So, and then we had Misty Brew, who was our local TV host, and she was our local Elvira type in Cape Girardeau. I know she played these as well, but I'm pretty sure it was when I was like around 10 years old or younger, possibly, and it explains a lot.
Well, as we were saying, you know, like this is a departure, but maybe somebody wants to talk about the beginning of the Poe cycle in 1960 when Fall of the House of Usher comes out, and then is followed quickly by Pit and the Pendulum, and then he starts doing, you know, little riffs with Tales of Terror and The Raven, etc. So he's kind of like building this little cottage industry.
Well, I know that they were giving him money. They were trying to offer him enough money to make 2 black and whites, and he said, "Hey, how about you give me the budget of that and the time to instead make something special?" And they took a gamble, and then they made a better film, and it paid off. So it started the series rolling type of thing. So it kind of kicked Corman into a little slightly higher echelon than the films that he was going to make itself, which I'm glad they gave him that breathing room.
Well, House of Usher is pivotal to the success of all of the Poe films because it was the 5th highest grossing film of 1960. And, you know, that's the year that Psycho came out, and
Right.
Psycho was one of the highest grossing films ever. The proceeds from House of Usher basically funded the rest of the series. I mean, none of them had to make any money because the series had already made just a gigantic pot of money for AIP.
And it was very different because it was kind of the introduction of the American Gothic, you know, kind of inspired by the Hammer films,
Right.
For sure.
and the idea of being able to see Gothic in color.
Well, and also Barbara Steele or not he wasn't in that one, but you had these influences that came from England and from Italy in those movies, and that just lush look to them just really felt European. We go back to that whole thing where I always thought for a very long time Vincent Price was from Europe. It's a part of that is because of how these movies looked and reminded me of Hammer and that beautiful lush look to them, and making something absolutely beautiful for very little money.
Well, Corman was adept at using very little money. You know, one
he
thing
was.
I thought was very funny was at the beginning of Masque of the Red Death. Well, for one, other than setting up the evilness of a guy by almost running over a baby, the Cormanness of filmmaking, where he has a tiny little chariot. You know what I mean? Really big enough for Vincent Price, and like everything else is so very grandiose. And I'm like, I bet you Corman was like, we don't have to pay for the giant chariot for this game.
I was like trying to figure out, is that like a leftover from Spartacus, one of the Roman chariots, and they just put like a top on top of it?
I just felt it was very Corman. You know what I mean? Elegant, but a little cheap on there too. Yeah.
Well, and we have our great, we talked about the colors, but our cinematographer for Masque of the Red Death is none other than Nicholas Roeg, who would go on to do amazing films like Don't Look Now, Walkabout, etc.
He worked on Dr. Zhivago as second unit stuff. I mean, it was on huge stuff all throughout. and a lengthy career. He even directed Witches in the 90s.
But the basic setup, does anybody want to do the synopses?
So film basically follows our heroine Francesca and her father and her love interest, who are swept up within Prince Prospero's evil reign as a plague stretches across the countryside that is called the Red Death, because you bleed out. We meet Death as one of the first characters in the film, as he plants the seed, as you will, of this plague. And as it proceeds, all of the royals and rich people decide to take shelter in Prince Prospero's home, thinking they'll be safe from the plague, as the entire countryside is ravaged by this. And we find out Prince Prospero is, in fact, a worshiper of the devil. With a name like Prince Prospero, you kind of have to be, especially if you're played by Vincent Price. And he finds himself enamored of the lady Francesca, whose faith in God and goodness equals his own in the devil and the dark.
Yeah, we've got Hazel Court as the resident lady of the castle, who's a bit put off by the presence of Francesca in the form of Jane Asher. We have, as you said, we have somebody who is intrigued by the notion of somebody whose faith is so strong, and to corrupt her would be the greatest gift he could give, to the devil.
Piece de resistance. And within this household, you have various characters who are very nefarious, and who meet their own ends in spectacular, fiery ways. Others that think that they're going down a path that's going to bring them happiness, but only brings them very bloody, face scratching death in their way. I love Masque of the Red Death also because they integrate Hoptoad into this as well, and I think it's just a neat way to include that. One thing I really love about Masque of the Red Death is the philosophical side of it. And I think this is part of the thing that Roger Corman says, I got too artsy fartsy, but I loved it because there's a lot of philosophy within this, especially the line about each man makes his own God. I thought that was just a really neat take. So, you face your own death. Death has your own face. And I thought that was just a beautiful way of showing it.
As I was watching it, this most recent viewing, I kept thinking, like, what fans of the AI Poe series must have thought when they showed up, thinking, okay, we had House of Usher, we had Pit and the Pendulum, we had, The Raven, we got Tales of Terror, and then you get this, which is so much an art house venture in terms of the deeper themes, in terms of just the color scheme, in terms of the kind of like headiness of it all. I'm curious, Dan, you said you watched this like all the time as a kid. Like, how has your viewing of it changed from when you first saw it to now?
I study more of the filmmaking side of it now, watching it just to see how he sets up things. I wasn't thinking about camera movements and all these other things, but in all honesty, it's really a marvel. There's barely a uninteresting shot in the whole thing, and he tells a story with the camera. When I was a kid, I was more enamored with the spookiness, the devilness, the whatever, but now I see through it and see the deeper themes that I didn't see as much. It's a fantastic film. I'd say it's probably in the top 10 of Corman's work.
Larry, how about you?
For me, watching it, especially the second time, I really focus a lot on the performances because, I don't know, there's something about 60s acting, especially doing like a medieval type of thing. There's just something mesmerizing to me about it. I've watched a lot more Vincent Price the last couple of years because he was one that I just didn't really watch a whole lot growing up, so I don't have that particular thing. But I always just assumed like he was just this hammy actor guy, and he could do that, but like he was like the real deal, and he's just so fun and interesting to watch on screen. The whole scene where he's not letting in the townspeople, he's being a real evil guy, but it's a really funny performance. So there's a lot of darkness to it, which is really what draws me to this particular one. Like even with the stuff with Hoptoad is all just darkly funny stuff. I just love the performances. That's the colors and the performances are really what draws me to this one.
Christian, have you written about this film for your blog?
I have.
I thought you had.
I watched it in the early days of the COVID pandemic. I wrote about it in July of that year because the parade of the multicolored deaths at the end of the film reminded me of like maybe the worst gay pride movie parade that I think I've ever seen. Yeah, I love this film. I'm not even gonna hedge. I think it's Corman's best film as a director, full stop. I won't say that it's his best film as a producer, because I just discovered this week, for instance, he was an unbilled producer on Fitzcarraldo.
Oh, wow.
So you never know when he's going to show up. He's an unbilled producer on Targets. He's an unbilled producer on Easy Rider. I mean, he's had a profound influence on film. But as a director, I think this is his best job as a director, in spite of the fact that he does some things for effect that don't make any sense. There's a famous interview with Orson Welles where he talks about his technique, how he places the camera, and he says, never place the camera in the back of a fireplace, because whose point of view is in the back of a fireplace? And then along, comes the scene between Hop Toad and Patrick McGee's character, and lo and behold, Corman has put the camera in the back of a fireplace. Now, I understand why he did it. He wanted to foreshadow the grisly end of the Hop Toad story with, putting the fire between those two characters. And but it's sort of an awkward way to do it. Corman really was experimenting in the last two Poe films. He was getting bored with them. So he was like, let's do this. Let's do this. One of the things that really strikes me about it is how deep focus it is. It has a very deep focus because he has much larger sets than he's used to, because they filmed it in Britain for tax credits and were able to access the scene docket. Anglo Amalgamated Pictures, which had just finished work on Beckett and Man for All Seasons. Annie Haller could do a lot with a little. This film is him doing a lot with a lot.
And it's a beautiful film. I mean, all of the Poe films, I think, are really great looking. And as you said, our art director, Daniel Haller, his sets for Pit and the Pendulum and House of Usher are extraordinary, and they're done on a budget. It reminds me very much of, Bernard Robinson over at Hammer, working magic with pennies. But yes, here he actually had a design that he could work with, and he had pre-existing sets that he could put these actors on. And then you've got Nicholas Roeg just capturing it all in widescreen. And that's why you have those amazing ballroom scenes with tons of people in them.
I read a piece of trivia that the way that they arranged the sets for the scene where Francesca is running through the castle had, basically 1.5 miles or 2 miles worth of rooms that she ran through.
Wow.
Winding through the studio. And that's just, there's no way that Corman would have done that in Hollywood. He wouldn't have had the money, but he had the money because he was getting half of his budget rebated by the British government for this film. Jessica has it right about Prospero. He's a different character than any of the other Poe films. Those films are sort of neurasthenic madmen who are often deeply divided as personalities.
Yeah.
Prospero is not deeply divided.
Nope,
he is very much himself.
He knows what he wants.
He knows what he wants. He's a philosopher villain, and he is all bad, and I love that. The only character that I think Price ever played that was more evil than Prospero was probably Matthew Hopkins.
Yep.
I mean, it's a terrific performance. It's just wonderful. I think Hazel Court is a delight in this film.
Yes.
I mean, she's the bitchiest Satanist that I think I've ever seen in a movie.
He's flawless in this.
I mean, Patrick McGee, who is an actor I generally don't like, is actually tolerable in this film. And I will admit that I do enjoy seeing his ultimate fate, because that's not an actor that I care for.
What do you got against Patrick McGee?
Nothing. It's just I've never liked the way he. I've never liked the way he enunciates his lines in any film. He reads his lines as if he's pronouncing them around a piece of rotten cheese.
It's the lip movement, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It is the lip movement. It's a very it's a very lip oriented delivery of lines.
I was gonna say the thing I love about Prospero is the fact that, first of all, he doesn't see himself as a villain at all. He sees himself as his own hero. and he's delivering this young woman from her own blindness to the reality of the world, kind of a thing. But I'm a Vincent Price girl. I love him. I feel bad because he never gets the girl in anything that I can remember. But in this particular film, it's interesting because he is a villain. He's horrible. He gets her dad. He kills her father in front of her. But Francesca sees he's his own worst enemy at the end, and gives him a kiss on the cheek because he's too stupid to realize, or too blind to realize, you're screwed now. You're gonna die. This is not who you think it is.
Yeah.
And you can tell in her face that she's like, feels sorry for him and wishes she could save him, but you can't. And I love that he brought that to that character. He could have played that straight villain and just had no redeeming qualities at all, but there's nuance there. You see these moments where he wants to kiss her and all of that, and there's a humanity to him. And I think that a lot of people don't talk about that enough, in terms of Vincent Price was a wonderful romantic hero type of an actor. He's tall, he's gorgeous, but he played these villains, and within those villains he brought a humanity.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about this a little bit on our Theater of Blood panel. He was able to bring that kind of charm to these villains and could do horrible things, and you would just be rooting for him. You'd be like, it's like, he's like a Freddy Krueger in that regard, where you're rooting for the bad guy, and yet you want to see him, get his just desserts at the end. I think this has a really great arc in that regard. Dan, do you remember what the first Vincent Price movie you saw?
I want to say it was probably House on Haunted Hill. I'm thinking.
Okay, sure.
That's like a public domain. They filmed, they played a lot, and he's at his peak hamminess in that film. It's great for him. That was probably quickly followed up by like The Abominable Dr. Phibes. My mother worshipped Vincent Price, so I grew up loving him. He used to host a show on the WTTW Mystery, and he would be the intro person for all these mysteries. So
right.
I always grew up thinking he was so charming and so spooky and so whatever. But he's also like the Hollywood's greatest villain. I mean, he plays murderers and necrophiles and whatever, and yet people still love him. Charming. Like, name another actor who could do such things and people are still like, I love him. He's amazing. He's so charming.
Invite him over. Exactly.
He had that.
Great dinner guest.
He was this modern Renaissance man. He was a gentleman and an art lover and a gourmet. I have one of his cooking books, and I love him to the point where I was happy to meet his daughter. I mean, like, that's such a random thing. Like, when you're asking me to do this, you're asking me to do, like, I love Roger Corman independently. I love Vincent Price independently. I love Poe independently. And when you put all these things together, you are really hitting my center. It's just like, I love this. And like I said, just seeing Tomb of Ligeia for the first time or whatever was just like medicine. Vincent Price is my favorite actor ever.
Yeah. I love the array of T-shirts we have. This is good.
I think T Villain did the Muppet Show Vincent Price, and this actually has the Muppets that were in it with him. This is his beautiful.
I even loved him on Batman as the worst villain ever, Egghead. I mean,
but he was so good.
Vincent Price could pull off hammy dialogue like that.
And I had to add to this, and I don't know how many people know about it, is the hilarious House of Frightenstein.
Mm-hmm. The Canada show.
It's so great. And a friend of mine named Mark Meir let me interview him about this because he grew up when that was airing. And he told me a great story about Vincent Price. Price came to the show, filmed all of his stuff in 1 week because he was just inserted between skits. And he, at the end of the shoot, he disappeared, and everybody thought, oh my God, did we make him mad? What happened? What happened? And he came back, and he brought crates of beer. And he spent the last night that he was in Canada drinking beer and telling stories to the entire crew about old Hollywood. And that is a class act.
So he basically threw a big party.
He threw a giant party and he bought the beer. He just wanted to do a kids show, and so he did. This random kids show in the middle of Canada.
And Larry, how about you? Where did you come encounter with Vincent Price?
You know, it's funny. I was like, okay, I know for sure it was this, and then somebody would say something here, and I was like, oh yeah. But I think the very first time was his voice for Thriller.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I was, 6 or whatever, 5 when that came out. So it's unmistakable. His voice, being that first thing you hear and know of him as his voice, is amazing. But then it was just like Dead Heat and Edward Scissorhands. It was like much later that I was like, I should watch some of this stuff. And then I saw The Tingler, and that was one of my favorite hangout horror movies I've ever seen. Like, we saw Theater of Blood at the Music Box and Dr. Fives. Like, I gotta see more stuff on the big screen, because there's something about him, how he was able to play on a big screen that not very many people could really master.
Well, and at this stage in his career, he was the prince of horror. He'd done House of Wax in 53, and then things had kind of quieted down for him. And then 58, 59, when he did The Fly and Return of the Fly, and his 2 films with Castle, Tingler, and House on Haunted Hill. And then he did House of Usher with Corman, and suddenly, had this amazing string of hits. And so he's absolutely at the height of his powers. Corman is at the height of his powers. When you hear that Price and Corman are doing another Poe film, people are going to show up. It's funny though, that because this one, they did not storm the gates to see Masque of the Red Death. I think it was a little artsy for folks, but as Christiana said, the series was already a success financially. Any other thoughts on Masque of the Red Death before we move forward into Tomb of Ligeia?
Well, you didn't ask me where I first saw Vincent Price. My first encounter with Vincent Price was his guest role on that 3-part episode of The Brady Bunch.
Oh yeah. Freaky now.
So talk about a Renaissance man right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's fun. I mean, Price has always been there in my cinema going life. Yep. But it's fun discovering other parts of his career once you get past the horror movies. Price always said his favorite of his films was Laura, which isn't a horror film at all, although it does have necrophilia in it, but not on his part. My favorite of his performances might be in Champagne for Caesar, where he's the head of the soap company that's sponsoring this quiz show, and he's getting more and more frustrated by the Ronald Colman character, who keeps answering the questions correctly and upping the total that he's winning, and Price is like kind of over a barrel because, on the one hand, he's going to wind up paying thousands and thousands of dollars to Ronald Colman's character. On the other hand, his ratings are going, through the roof while this guy is on the TV. I love that film, and I love that performance. I mean, let's face it, Price's legacy isn't horror. The Poe films have basically united Corman and Poe for all time.
And Jessica, how about you? I mean, you said you were introduced to Price early on.
I was introduced to him very early on. And I want to say, like, some of the first things I saw were probably Masque of the Red Death. I knew him already when The Great Mouse Detective came out. And I loved him as Ratigan. And apparently that's one of his favorite roles he ever did was Ratigan, because he got to sing. But also, the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. I knew who he was when he was in that. And so Vincent Price has literally been there my whole life. I would say, though, the one movie that a lot of people don't talk enough about was Dragonwyck. He was amazing in that film. Beautiful, beautiful movie. Yeah. Dragonwyck women, yeah.
and I think that is one that you if you're a Price fan, you eventually track down.
Yep.
But it's because he did so many films that were so popular. I think you do kind of worked your way through his body of work and eventually get to the deeper cuts like Dragonwyck. And it's funny that Laura is a deep cut only because it's not a horror film. So most people are coming to Price through horror. But your references to Batman and Brady Bunch just made me think he's also the voice of Iron Tail in Here Comes Peter Cottontail, the Rankin Bass film. He was everywhere, and he's always been kind of like, you know, your favorite uncle. Like, I love Vincent Price, and he's always just seems like he's having a great time. Whatever.
Well, this is the season of the horror grandpas, since, you know, he shares a birthday with Christopher Lee, and the day before that is the birthday of Peter Cushing.
Yep.
And they were all great friends. So.
My trinity.
Oh, one other thing that endeared Price to me late in life as a queer person, he's one of the founders of PFLAG, which is the Parents and Friends of Gay and Lesbians. And it's entirely because, you know, his daughter, Victoria, is gay. A lot of parents in that position, particularly in the 1980s, would have sort of distanced themselves, but he just like embraced it and threw himself into it, which is wonderful. So.
AC and I were talking the other day about the fact that if you've grown up in the area of that part of the country, you know how backwards it can be and how horribly racist and bigoted. Victoria had talked a little bit about how at the early part of his career, Vincent was sort of fascinated by Adolf Hitler's thought processes and all this stuff. But then he became the most liberal actor ever, you know, to come out of Hollywood. Like he completely changed. He completely just had nothing to do with that at that point. And I think that's another part of why I love him, is because he's from that part of the country, and yet he grew up around that just like I did, and broke free of that mindset. You know, completely embraced his daughter being gay and loved her and supported her. And I think that's beautiful.
I love Uncle Vincent.
Uncle Vinny.
Any other thoughts on Masque of Death?
They have the most flammable peasant town of all time.
That's what you're talking about.
I think it was constructed of kerosene and paraffin. You know?
Yep.
Even the rock, because there's some
like,
so much.
They put the torch to one section, and before they can move it around and whatever, it just bursts into flames. So that's rather interesting. And I do love the moment that a flaming man runs out of them, and they wrench the baby away from this gentleman, but they don't tell him to roll over or anything else like that. It's as long as you just wrench that baby out. There's a lot of baby wrenching in the first 5 minutes of this movie.
She's my daughter.
Out in front of the wagon, then out of the flaming man's hand. So
Yeah, it actually reminds me too, because they used a child to play an adult.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
The
Like for the ballet,
Esmeralda.
the ballerina.
Yeah. I was like,
Greenlaw.
there's no way to get away with that now.
She was uncredited, but she is the little girl that taunts the aunt in The Haunting at the beginning of that before she leaves for the mansion. That's the same little girl, and she was in The Day the Earth Caught Fire as a child. So that even came before Masque of the Red Death, which it was bizarre that, I mean, they couldn't have two little people cast, but it was interesting to see her do that voiceover. You know what I mean? Yeah,
to have somebody else dubbing clearly coming out of her voice or her mouth.
And not only that, like the weirdness of Patrick McGee, who I love and is awesome actor, but he is way too enamored with her as he's dancing. As she's dancing.
That's a great dialogue line.
And then up until he feels like punching her, you know, for knocking over wine. So I'm kind of glad that he's caught on fire.
The one thing that I completely never put together, because I guess I'm an idiot, until I rewatched it recently, was that every room of the colored rooms matches a death. And I'm like, oh, because I just was thinking, oh, yellow's the color of fear. That's why they have that color. And that's why every one of those matches the colors of the robes. And I'm like, oh, that's brilliant.
The colors don't match the order that Poe wrote them in. They kind of took their own artistic license.
Right.
Yeah.
But Corman also mentioned that no one Poe poem was enough to really carry a film. So he would let the poem be the third act, and then he would do the first two acts to what he thought Poe would be, this person leading up to the poem itself. And the Masque of the Red Death is way shorter than Tomb of Ligeia. And so obviously they had to flesh it out with Hoptoad. That's a whole nother thing. But I guess that was based on a reality of a ball where five people caught fire in like the 14th century.
Oh,
But
wow.
they needed all that to flesh out the whole film to make it better. But I think it plays great.
Yeah, I actually think The Masque of the Red Death is probably the closest to Poe that any of the Poe films actually came. I mean, it's the entire story is there, which is not necessarily the case with the other Poe films, as
Right.
we shall see with the Tomb of Ligeia.
That's a great transition. Let's talk about the Tomb of Ligeia. This was the first time that Corman was shooting on location. He was also still in England, but this was the first time that he was actually using open air instead of on sets. And it's a really beautiful film, again, shot by Arthur Grant, who's also a Hammer veteran. Thoughts on Tomb of Ligeia?
Well, I mean, I just recently watched it right after Masque of Red Death, so it was weird seeing how it was much more muted. But when you say it was his first time really kind of going, not first time, but maybe it was, but going outside does give it a whole different feel than Masque of Red Death in that way. So I thought that was really fascinating to see him just like deal with horses, and that really, it was cool seeing him work in a different sandbox in the same year. So I thought that was really cool.
Poor Vincent can't get the girl again.
Nope.
But I like
Good cat though.
I like the look they gave him in this. I love those iconic sunglasses that he wears, and I love just some of the creepiness within this movie that they get away with. I was watching the scene where the maid is in the room and she's gonna sneeze, and her face takes this contorted like, you know, and I'm like, no wonder she almost peed herself. Look at her face. And she's turning like, oh my God. There's little subtle creepy things that they've worked within it that I thought were great. He plays that tortured soul to the hilt within this. And Vincent Price was a beautiful man. He was tall, he was heroic looking, but you know, you never got the romantic hero aspect of him in these movies. He's always like the tortured man. And I love that this at least gave him a little bit of that. He almost makes it, he almost gets to be happy. But I thought that was a nice change for him.
Prospero and Verdon are very different characters.
Yeah.
And I think it does give him an opportunity to show off his skills. Christian, do you remember when you came to this one?
No, I don't.
I just keep asking.
I think I saw it first in the 90s, but I may have seen it before then. I do know that I saw it at the Vincentennial, though, which was a big film festival that they held on the occasion of Price's 100th birthday in St. Louis. And they brought Roger Corman in to introduce a couple of films, and Victoria Price was there introducing some films, and some of the other people that he worked with were introducing films. But I did see this there. I saw this, The Raven, and The Abominable Dr. Phibes.
That would be that. Play that at my funeral. But
they also, I mean, they played a bunch of other stuff too. Stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think of. But I had seen the film by that point, because I've owned it since, I don't know, about 2003. I have the old MGM Midnight Movies edition. It has a commentary by Corman, and then it has another commentary by Elizabeth Shepard, who plays Rowena / Ligeia.
Yeah, Bruce Lanier Wright had a book called Night Walkers, and it talks about kind of like the modern Gothic era, and he talks his way through the entire Poe series. And so I did kind of make a point of seeking out all 8 of those to be able to kind of watch and then read, because this was in the days before commentary. When you watched a movie and nobody else had seen it, you went to those reference books. And so that's kind of how I came to this film was, okay, my buddy Bruce Lanier Wright has recommended it to me. I will check it out and I'll go back and see what he said about it. But he talks about how Price is playing in the same kind of tortured sandbox as Roderick Usher, but it's that same kind of, like you said, that kind of split personality where he goes into these trances, these thralls, but he's still doing a really terrific grounded performance, even with, the big slice of ham that comes with it.
It's also really similar to Tales of Terror in the first entry in that
for sure,
where his
Morella.
daughter, there's a whole incest thing kind of going on there too with it's like, oh my god, you can get deep with it. But that whole I'm tortured, I'm staying in my house, my dead wife is haunting me forever and a day, and then this woman comes into my life, even though here it's not his daughter, but she looks just like as his daughter did in that, his wife. And I love the fact that we have so many female villains in these movies, especially like with Hitting the Pendulum as well. You know, Vincent Price got his butt kicked by a lot of women.
Well, Barbara Steele doesn't come to the best end in Hitting the Pendulum. Because I remember seeing that like on a late night, creature feature, and like the ending of that movie is just nightmare fuel, and you're like, wait, that's it? Now I have to go to bed?
After seeing her eyes,
you're like, oh shoot, Dan, you just saw it, right? What was your experience of it?
It was amazing to see it. The beginning is all amazing with a castle and the everything itself. It's very atmospheric, and it is a departure from just that studio feel. And the whole movie, it is a little bit more slower and nuanced, but it's still poetic and beautiful. And I definitely agree with Christiane. There are elements of Rebecca in there itself, but there's elements of Fives also. But I thought it was beautiful. I mean, I wouldn't put it up there as high, but his look, the feel, everything is fantastic. And I think it probably sets a record for films for most cat jump scares for any ever. Because I think there were at least 10, at least. You know what I mean? I did listen to the commentary on YouTube but not watching the film. So I listened to a commentary of a film that I wasn't watching.
Dedication.
But in general, I thought it was magic. I think it's a great film. But I will admit that I didn't know it was the same actress for playing both Ligeia and the wife. The funny thing is I was like, wow, Ligeia is so attractive and so amazing or whatever, because she's dark featured and darkness, whatever. And then the other wife, I'm like, not so much. Why would he even bother? Ligeia is way better. Not knowing it's the same person. I love the fact when she finally finds her, that Ligeia with her arms like this. And she somehow falls into her and can't get herself free, which is just hilarious. How do you even do that to begin with? But I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
I love the fact that he's basically like dug up his wife and put her in a basic sex doll position. You're kind of like, what are those nightly visits all about? I wonder.
I don't know if he's just sleeping next to her. You know what I mean? Yeah.
This is Poe by way of a rose for Emily.
I will say I do like her.
Elizabeth Shepard.
Yeah, I think she's very charming in this movie. I was like, I could see why he was like, oh, I guess I can go with her.
Well, if you want an interesting piece of trivia about Elizabeth Shepard, she is the first actress to play Emma Peel on The Avengers.
Oh.
She played her for 4 episodes, and the producers decided, this isn't working, and they hired Diana Rigg to play the part. So Price has acted with 2 versions of Emma Peel.
Yep.
Legend.
For some reason, I just had Bloodbath at the House of Death just jump into my brain. And if you've never seen that, you need to see it, people.
I don't think I've seen that. Bloodbath at the House of Death.
You've never seen? Oh my god!
When is it from?
It is from like the early 80s, late 70s. It's the only movie I can think of that is a parody film of every cult British horror movie ever made. Like The Haunting. All of these scientists and parapsychologists go to this place called the House of Death. It's just hilarious. I can't describe it.
Okay, no, I'm sold.
Vincent Price is a cult leader who just is the most sassiest mofo you were ever going to meet. He's brilliant. I saw that when I was 13.
Any other thoughts on Tomb of Ligeia?
I think that this has a really strong performance from its leading lady. Price is the sort of actor that can trample his co-stars, and he absolutely does not do that here. He is very much in collaboration with her in their scenes together. I think that Elizabeth Shepard is probably the best actress of all of the Poe heroines. And, it shames me to say that, even though I know that my goddess Barbara Steele was in The Pit and the Pendulum. I mean,
that's a different
Also,
quality.
I think he has more screen time in Ligeia with him than Barbara Steele did in that film.
Yeah, I mean, they don't share the screen very much. I mean, I like Jane Asher in Masque of the Red Death, but I mean, she is very much not she doesn't have the same charisma on screen, and I think that Elizabeth Shepard does. And she also has that very perfect diction of a Shakespearean. Corman was complaining well, not necessarily complaining, talking about how different the experience of working with English actors and with Price, for that matter, than what he was used to, because Corman trained with the method, and these are very much not method performances at all. There's a tension between what the director wants and what the actors give him. I really loved the way that Corman composed the screen in Masque of the Red Death. In Ligeia, I see him more composing the screen with editing in mind, and there's there's that climb up the bell tower that's just like a tour de force in cross-cutting editing. The formal elements of the late Poe films, I mean, basically are what distinguishes Poe from somebody like William Castle or any of the other low-budget grifters that were out there, like, Ron Armand or whatever.
Well, and on that same commentary track, he talks about working in England, and the crews don't move as quickly as he was used to, or that he was wanting them to.
Yeah, and they break for tea, and they break for 11s, and
yeah.
Second breakfast.
For this film and for Masque of the Red Death, that Price does kind of disappear for large chunks of the film. Like for Masque of the Red Death, there's a lot of focus on Juliana and on Francesca, where Price is just nowhere to be seen. And the same is true here, where we're really focusing on Rowena and her kind of detective work of trying to figure out what's going on.
Well, the film is largely from her point of view. I mean, that's understandable. And Masque of the Red Death is from Francesca's point of view. I mean, breaking away towards the dream sequences with Juliana, marrying Satan, I mean, is narratively impure, but it's actually a lot of fun.
And Jessica, offline, you had a little bit of trivia that I don't want to steal from you about John Westbrook, who plays our character of Christopher here, but he also plays in the other movie.
Yep, he is uncredited as the Red Death. He is the voice and the physical form of the Red Death. So the kind of milquetoast, I want to steal you from Vincent Price, haha, that's going to happen, character in Tomb of Ligeia is actually the Red Death. And I kept thinking, I'm like, I know that voice. And then I dug around and saw that.
I was wondering, because I didn't know that Robert Towne wrote this until I saw the movie. Did they have did they work together a bunch, or was it kind of a...
Robert Towne did a few films with Corman, Last Woman on Earth. They did like 3 of those films down there, and Robert Towne ended up performing, I think, in Last Woman on Earth. And the reason he was brought down there was because he was writing the script, and so they said, well, we need the writer on hand. You could just play this part as well. So yeah, he did work with Corman, and as Corman has famously said, if you work with me enough times and you're successful, you won't have to work with me anymore. You'll actually go on to have a Hollywood career.
Well, Towne said that his script for the Tomb of Ligeia is the hardest thing that he ever did, and it's a tight screenplay.
And Towne would, of course, go on and do The Last Detail and win an Oscar for Chinatown. So, R.I.P. Roger Corman. We are only a few weeks away from his passing, and he really did change the face of Hollywood. He mentored so many different filmmakers and actors. We would not have the Hollywood that we had in the 70s if it weren't for his mentorship in the 50s and 60s.
And we wouldn't have as much Vincent Price as we do either. I got to interview Corman when he did the remake or reimagining of Death Race 2000. It just was such a neat experience to get to talk to him about his career and his life in that film. And this wasn't that long ago. This was maybe 10 years ago. Guy was with it. He was just on the last drive-in and just so with it. And up until the end, you could tell he was loving it. It was great. And, we'll never have another Roger Corman.
The fact that he was going right up until the end, 98 years old, just sharp. He's able to deliver his stories like the raconteur he was. And we dearly miss you, Roger, but thank you for all that you gave us.
He did a wonderful Criterion Closet video last year too, in which
That's right. I have seen that.
He emphasized the work of all of the alums that he had worked with. There are no Corman films in the Criterion collection, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Not that he directed.
Not that he directed.
Because Targets is in there.
Yeah,
I think.
Targets is in there, and I think Easy Rider has had a Criterion edition.
Yeah, I think it did too.
And he did produce both of those. But I mean, it's appropriate for him to be in there because in the 1970s, he saved art house cinema. He saved international cinema in the United States. It may not even exist as a marketplace in the United States if not for Corman's efforts to democratize foreign films.
I have a little anecdote that I want to share that I didn't tell you about, AC, because this was something that happened at a couple Horror Hounds ago. I was wearing these earrings, which are my Vincent Price earrings, and I ran into Dermot Mulroney was there, and I went up to get my photo op with him, and he looks at my earrings and goes, "Vincent Price, oh my god!" And he was just geeking out. And he goes, "I was in a movie with Vincent Price," and I looked at him like, "What movie were you in with Vincent Price?" Right? And he's like, "No, I was in his last movie." And I go, "I gotta find out if he's on crack or not." And I'm like, "Oh my god, he was in the last movie Vincent Price shot called The Heart of Justice." Was this TV movie for TNT.
Oh, wow.
And I ran over it the last day and I went over to his booth because there was no line. And I looked at him, I said, "You are going to tell me about working with Vincent Price now." And he proceeded to tell me just how great it was. And he goes, "My thing is, I want to know how far back in the history of acting I've touched." And he just was so giddy about having worked with him. And that was one of his earlier movies too. But it was such a neat thing to discover and geek out with him about, because he was so excited about finding people that appreciated that man.
Yeah, I think that's the quality that Price brings, is that he is a very special person, and he had a genuine enthusiasm for his craft and for, as Dan mentioned, all of these different aspects of, culinary expert and art. And, he was an astonishing human being. And that, I think that comes through in his performances.
He had such a large art collection. I guess he started buying stuff when he was 12. But if you went to UCLA as art school, you had to go to his house or his collection. That was part of the curriculum. I wish I'd seen
Was to visit the Vincent Price collection.
Yeah, in the 1950s, he curated a series of art to be sold through the Sears catalog.
Yes, I saw that too. And also, in earlier films in Europe, he used to take the money that they gave him to stay in 5-star hotels, go stay in a shitty hotel, and spend all that money on art.
Yeah.
So the people would be looking for them, and they'd be like, "No, he's over there on the bad side of town." They're like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Look at this Renoir I bought," or whatever. So he was ahead of the curve of art. So he was buying things before they were taking off. So he had this amazing art collection.
I have this vision of him talking with Edward G. Robinson on the set of the 10 Commandments, and just all they were doing is geeking out about art.
That'd be amazing. Now, the thing that I keep remembering too, because everybody talks about his cooking and food, I will never forget the clip of him making fish in a dishwasher. I think it was the Carson show. And he was in his apron and he's showing Johnny how to cook. And he's like, "No, trust me, steam the fish in your dishwasher." And he does it. But he shows this whole thing. He actually is serious. He wraps it in tinfoil, puts it in a dishwasher, and cooks it in the dishwasher. And he's like, "It's tender. It's perfect. I'm telling you, this is how to do it. It's like, this is amazing.
That's disgusting, Vincent. I'm sorry. You should be ashamed of yourself. Any final thoughts on our double feature?
Yeah, I think that the Tomb of Ligeia and to a lesser extent the Masque of the Red Death represents sort of a turning point in Corman's career, because prior to the Tomb of Ligeia, most of his films were filmed on sound stages, and he was getting tired of that. And after that, his films had a more outdoorsy quality. I mean, I'm thinking of films like The Wild Angels or Gas or Bloody Mama. I mean, those are all very outdoor films. I remember seeing an interview with him once that he thought of filming on a soundstage as being the equivalent of exploring the unconscious, because the unconscious mind isn't conscious of the outside. I think that with the Poe films, he went basically as far into the unconscious as he could at the time, and decided to explore the outside world for a while.
Dan?
I mean, it's just three great tastes that taste great together. You know, Poe, Corman, that Price. It's just a great thing, and these are films you could revisit again and again.
Larry?
It was funny, before doing this, I was thinking, man, what on earth can I possibly bring to the table? Because I just liked the movie. I was like, oh, I'll do this one. I really think about it a lot. But I'm glad to have been here, because it makes me more excited to check out the ones I haven't seen yet, and hearing the stories and stuff. And we're going to think about that watching the movies. So hopefully the people who are watching this and aren't familiar with it, or like me, who are now excited to kind of go back and check some of these out. And they should definitely watch these two for sure, because they're fantastic movies. And I feel like Roger Corman himself doesn't really get enough credit for being actually like a really good director. Like, everyone thinks of him as like the schlocky producer guy, but like he knew his stuff.
And I think you definitely get that with these two films. You get to see Corman as a real director and really exploring. It's funny because he was already kind of established, and here he is trying to do things differently. You know, he's trying to do things different than he'd already done. They'd already been successful at. Jessica?
My parting thought is the fact that Roger Corman, Vincent Price, and Edgar Allan Poe showed the world that Americans can do the horror shtick just as well as the Brits can, and go as gothic as they can. We can run with the big guns, like the Shelleys and the Stokers with our guy Poe, you know, and then you've got guys like, you know, Corman, who just made this beautiful works. And then you have actors like Price who could eat that up. I love them, and they're all building blocks of me. So thank you, Roger Corman, and thank you, Vincent Price.
Thank you all so much. This is a great conversation. And I would like to echo Larry's thoughts as well, that I hope this does inspire folks to reach back and check out these old films from 60 years ago, because there's a lot of things that reflect and have shaped what we have today. Like anybody, as we all show off our t-shirts, I think like anybody, you need to understand the past in order to understand the present and to look into the future. So thank you all for an enlightening conversation, and look forward to having you all on again very soon. Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.